Dear Lord, thank you for this morning. Thank you for the privilege of gathering together to meet with you and and have fellowship with each other. I pray that you be with all of those of us who are ill or traveling. You would bring them back safely to us soon. I pray that you be with Mary Elizabeth this morning as she teaches, and that we would have our ears and hearts open to hear what you have to say to us from your word. In Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you. Well, we are continuing our journey carrying the letter that is the book of Revelation to the 7 churches there in Asia Minor, to whom John the seer sent them on behalf of our Lord, who said, write this down and send it to the 7 churches in Asia Minor. So once again, I'm going to ask the home audience to help us out. Make sure that that you are seeing what we need to see here. Second, let me.
I'm seeing our very lovely teacher.
Well, you're hopefully about to see different stuff.
Okay, just letting you know.
So we're gonna so now you can see the start of the show. Oop, let's see. Let me get this back up.
Ooh.
Yep, slides flying by. There we go. What do you see now? Home audience.
A map, a horse, or not a real
Okay.
horse,
Okay.
and you.
Okay. Not what you're supposed to see.
Oh, sorry.
That's
What
okay.
you
No,
want
that's
me
what
to
I
see
needed
and
you to
I'll
tell me
lie.
that. I needed you to tell me that. What do you see now?
Same.
A map.
A map. Do you see anything else?
No.
Groovy. We're good. Technology. So remember last week, we picked up the letter from John the seer on the island of Patmos. We came across in a boat to the port of Ephesus, and we learned about Ephesus. Is Ephesus a rinky-dink little backwater town?
No.
No.
Big town, important town, very full of itself, right? Great as Artemis of the Ephesians. We've got a real strong sense of civic pride. And so Jesus saying, y'all get your act together or I'm taking your lampstand away from you, really would have hit them at the core, right? We're supposed to be prominent. And yet we're being told that our light among the churches is at risk. Then we went to Smyrna. Oh, wait, got somebody else in the room. To Smyrna, not in Cobb County, Smyrna. What do you remember about Smyrna?
Devil, put him in jail for 10 days.
Yeah.
They needed to be faithful until death.
Yes.
Polycarp, one of the guys.
Right. Who, as a child, certainly would have heard this letter being read. The Bishop of Polycarp, many years later, who actually was martyred for the faith, and would have actually heard that letter read in his church. Yeah, pretty amazing. So now we've moved on from Smyrna to the city of Pergamum. And you know it better, we all know it better, by another name, Troy. Right, this is ancient Troy. That's actually there in modern day Pergamum. It is still a city. You can see there are ruins there around this park. That's what Pergamum looked like when John the seer is sending a letter there. This is Roman Pergamum. You can see it's built on a hill. There's an Acropolis, the fancy part of town. And we're going to walk through part of this city. On the far left of your screen, you see a very small, comparatively small building with a white roof. That is a temple to Bacchus. It is a part of the theater complex. You can see the stadium style seating there, just to the right of it, our right. Quiz question, was that stadium seating built by Greeks or by Romans?
Greeks,
Greeks, how do you know that?
I'm guessing because it was the first Olympics.
So,
Exactly.
exactly, exactly. They built it into the mountain. Greeks always built their stadium seating using existing hills and mountains. The Romans, very pompous, always wanted to prove we can build our own mountain. And so they would always build freestanding stadium seating. Think Mercedes-Benz, right? They build their own stadium seating. Greeks always built it into the mountain. Our real estate guy would recognize that, right? How do you use the real estate? Yeah, so that's the theater there. It was very common. It was typical, in fact, for a stadium to be associated with a temple. The plays would be offered in honor of the god, and that very often was Bacchus, the god of wine and enjoyment of life. Then you can see in the center foreground of the picture here, you can see a building with a white roof that kind of looks like a squared off letter A lying on its side. You can see that it has a courtyard in the middle with an inner structure. You can see that there's a colonnade around it. And you can see that below the colonnade, there's some very deep relief carving and sculpture. We're going to walk around there now. We're looking at the stadium seating now. You can see the modern city there in the background. Gives you an idea. You realize it's bigger when you see it in real life than on the model, right? That's the remains of the temple to Bacchus that we saw. And now we walk further up the hill and we look down on that structure that looks like a squared off A turned on its side. You can see steps leading up. And then we're going to go to the Berlin Museum and see a reconstruction of part of that temple to the gods. Temple in,
Is this in Pergamum?
yes. Well, this is in the museum, the Berlin Museum. It is a reconstruction
Pergamum.
of what is in Pergamum, but this is in Berlin. Yeah. Yeah, but it started out in Pergamum. Yeah, they've taken parts of it and they've reconstructed and they filled in. So this is at the Berlin Museum. You can get a sense of the size of it here. It's pretty massive. And I think too, you can imagine if somebody were big enough, and I mean really big enough, they could recline on those steps and put their arms
Good morning.
on the side porticos as an armrest. Kind of like a throne.
You must have been exhausted.
Again, we can see, now I want you to imagine how giant that figure would be. Legs stretching forward, reclined on that. It is believed that that was the intent behind this structure, that it was a throne for the chief god of the Greeks, which of course was Zeus. This is not an alien concept. Remember that the Ark of the Covenant.
15.
Helena, we can hear. Oh, I'm going to mute Helena.
And I said, go back.
Here we go. Remember that the Ark of the Covenant has those two cherubim that have their wings bent over it, right? And scholars debate whether that was understood to be a seat for God or perhaps a footstool. But Sacred architecture like that was often understood to be a place for the god to sit. Now, you saw on the sides, I'll back you up a little bit, you can see these deep relief sculptures on either side. We're going to take a close look at these. We're walking up the steps, right? And these sculptures tell an epic story of the battle where the gods defeat the giants to establish their supremacy, the gods' supremacy over all things. This is a close-up of a section. That's Athena, the goddess Athena in the middle. Her face obviously has been knocked off through the ages. And you can see with her right arm, she's grabbing the very luxurious hair of a giant. And he is reaching over his head and grabbing rather futilely at her right arm. You can see the look of torment on his face. He really knows he's done for. It's really magnificent sculpture. I think you can even appreciate the eyes of the giant there in the lower part of the screen on the right. Much of his face has been knocked off, but I think you can still see from his eyes this profound worry. The giant on the left, you might be able to appreciate that around his left arm, you see something coiling. That is a serpent, a great serpent. You can see a coil of the serpent extending beyond his right to our left side. And you can see something coiling over his right leg. There were mythic serpents that were understood to have been allies of the gods in this epic battle with the giants. And it was this battle that led to the enthronement of the gods. So this is a place of pride for the people of Pergamum. It is a defining piece of architecture. I'm going to scroll back a little bit. Look at the detail. Look at, I mean, no other building has that amount of sculpture on it. That's a place of pride, a place of identity. And it is a throne for the gods.
So which gods? Is it this Balaam they talk about?
Balaam is a prophet in the Old Testament. We'll cover that. Yeah.
Baal.
No, Balaam.
I know that. I was wondering if he meant Baal, but Baal was in Hebrew.
Yeah, no, because they talk about Balaam in the letter. Okay, Balaam and Balak. Another cult that was extremely popular in Greco-Roman, in Roman Pergamum was the cult to the emperor. And you can see here he is shown, this is not in Pergamum. There are no extant statues of emperors in Pergamum, but this is exemplary of how they would be depicted. This one is Augustus, and he is enthroned. He's got what does he have in his right hand?
It's a statue or something.
Well, yeah, but what's actually in his hand? A ball, a globe. He's got the whole world in his hands, right? And standing on that is winged Nike. Nike, of course, the Greek goddess of victory, swoosh, right? That's where the swoosh comes from. She's winged. So he's got the whole world in his hands, and standing on that as his servant is Nike.
Who's the guy?
This is Augustus Caesar. Yeah. These depictions were based on a sculpture that no longer exists, but it was a sculpture of Zeus that was in Olympia, Greece, first Olympics, right? And you can see he is seated on a throne, and winged Nike is in his hand. He has a staff in his left hand with an eagle on top. I don't think we need that really explained to us, this soaring majestic creature. And then what are teeny tiny little creatures?
Yes, it was the cats.
Are those cats or are those
Sheep.
Lions.
lions? Lions. So that is intended to give you a perspective. Even a lion, first of all, is at his feet and is tiny compared to him. This is the kind of guy who could use that as a recliner. Right?
Mary Elizabeth, is the
Yes.
statue of Zeus, was that one of the ancient wonders of the world that
It
no
sure
one-
was. It sure
Okay.
was. There have been artist recreations of it, but we do not know what we do not actually know specifically what it looked like. We have descriptions of it. That's how these artist reconceptions are done, but we do not, obviously we don't have a photograph. And
I'm
yet,
guessing it would, my remembrance of reading about that was that the lions probably were life size,
right,
and then that
Right.
Zeus was that big.
exactly. Exactly.
Wow.
It was massive. It would be considered a wonder of the world now. Yeah. Yeah. And this is their understanding of who the gods are. So another temple complex and cult that was important in Pergamum was the cult of Asclepius, who is the god of healing. And there was an important medical center there that was particularly known for a medicinal eye salve. We'll also look at another part of their medicinal options there in a minute. But notice the serpents. I think you can see the serpent wrapped around Asclepius' staff. The pedestal there, that column, is from that temple. I think you can appreciate there's some serpents on there. And if that reminds you of medical symbols, that's where those come from. And of course, in veterinary medicine, Ashley, we put a V over the caduceus, which is the one on the left that has the two snakes. Yeah. That was an important cultic center there. So if you wanted to go to the doctor, you had to go to this temple complex. I want us to look at what is said to the church there in
So this is
Pergamum.
in Berlin, that's Germany, right?
I'm sorry, say again.
Berlin, I'm going back to.
Yep, Berlin's in Germany.
So what water did you get across to get there, or you just?
No, what I'm saying is German archaeologists excavated and removed. Same way the sculptures from the Parthenon in Athens are in the London Museum. So let's look at what is said to Pergamum in chapter 2, verse 13. Somebody read that first phrase, chapter 2, verse 13.
I know where you live.
And the next few words.
Where is Satan's throne is.
Yeah. You saw the throne. That's exactly what Jesus is talking about. Public architecture, number one. And notice there has been someone martyred in that congregation, Antipas. We don't know the circumstances. Jesus and John the seer then in verse 14 are referring to an incident in the Old Testament. The prophet Balaam, who's not a Hebrew prophet, he was a I will use the term pagan. So he was not a Hebrew prophet, kind of for hire. You can hire him to curse somebody for you, right? He's hired by the king Balak to curse the Hebrews as they are on their way through his territory in the wake of the Exodus. And God prevents Balaam from being able to do that and convinces Balaam that's not the thing to do. It's a marvelously hilarious story. But for reasons that John and the church at Pergamum only, they alone understand why he chooses this. But that he's talking about a stumbling block being put into the way of the church. And that stumbling block refers to eating meat sacrificed to idols. Remember, we talked about that it's not like you can make reservations at Bones or go to Olive Garden or get takeout from Chick-fil-A. Meat almost exclusively is available through the pagan temples because that's where the sacrifices are made. Meat is expensive, right? We think of barbecue as cheap. It wasn't. Meat is expensive. So you use it, you reserve it for a sacrifice to the gods, and then the portions that are not burned are sold. And many of the complexes even have restaurants associated with them. They may have a butcher shop and they may have a restaurant. So your boss, especially let's say if Ashley, you had a job here at Asclepius's temple, your boss might say, and we're all going to go out to dinner here on Friday, and we're all going to raise our glass to the god Asclepius. What do you do if you're a Christian? And so this question of, do we participate in eating meat that has been sacrificed to idols? Now, Paul is going to take this issue on as well, and he's going to recognize the meat's not the issue. But what John is worried about here is the allegiance and just going along, go along to get along. Right? He's very concerned about that. So now we've delivered our letter in Pergamum, and we're going to move on to Thyatira. And you can see there, Thyatira sits on a river. It's the Lycus River, sir.
Was Antipas Polycarp friend, is that the same thing?
No, we don't know who. That's all we know about Antipas. He was martyred. That's all we know.
Okay.
Yep. So this is the modern city of Thyatira. It has not preserved a large archaeological park the way Ephesus has, but they have preserved certain parts of it. But for the most part, the modern city sits on top of the ancient city. In ancient times and to this day, Thyatira was known as a town full of craftsmen. It is not a super rich town. It's middle-class working people and artisans, people who have marketable trade skills. And in particular, the textile and dyeing industry is really important in Thyatira. In fact, you already know someone from Thyatira that you met back in the book of Acts. Lydia, exactly, Lydia, or the Greek version of it, Lydia. And what did Lydia do? What was her business? She sold purple, exactly. So she's in this dyeing and textile industry. And I show you these here. This is how it would have been done in ancient times. You simply took your dye item, you diluted it in water, or depending on its solubility, perhaps in something that had some alcohol in it, or oil. But for the most part, these are water soluble dyes. So they're not nearly as dark as dyes are now. And that color, that red there and that yellow there are actually made from the same ingredient, the madder root that you see in that person's hand there. And it grows there in that region uniquely. It's not available anywhere else in the world. And depending on, you dilute it, you grind it up, you dissolve it, and then you'd soak your fibers in it. And you can see that picture in the lower left shows you the effect of letting it soak for longer and longer and longer. You'll notice, yes,
Is this like yarn that we're seeing? Is
Yes,
that what they were dyeing?
yes, this is a yarn that,
Okay,
that
thank
they are
you.
showing us here. Yes,
Used for what purpose?
And
everything,
would,
everything, rugs, clothes, everything,
what
everything.
did you say the root was called?
Madder, M-A-D-D-E-R, the madder root. And the longer you let it soak, the darker it gets. So you see that one on that in the bottom picture, the lower left picture, the skein on the far left, you see how dark that is. That is probably what the ancients called purple. Was actually this deep, deep, deep red. The only other way to get that was divers getting oysters and shellfish, right? That's also where you're getting pearls, right? Obviously, which do you think is more expensive? Divers who can hold their breath and go to the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, or some stuff you gather there in the countryside of Thyatira? Right, right. So this stuff, the divers, extraordinarily expensive. So only the wealthy could afford that. This is still pricey, right? They know who they're competing with, but not nearly as pricey as the dye derived from the shellfish. So, so in other words, Lydia is part of an international business. She's probably a member of a family there from Thyatira, that's their traditional business. And she's the head of their office in Philippi. Like I said, this town is full of craftsmen like this. There are also people there who make earthenware, who produce then clothing from the yarn. This is a whole industry. I mean, think Dalton, Georgia, right? Right. You can have an entire region dependent on this. And as I said, this stuff is pricey. It's not as pricey as what's sold to the nobles that comes from the dyes from shellfish. But again, if you have a major contract with nobility or a noble family to provide their purple, and they invite you to dinner at the temple of Zeus, or at their home, or to a play at the theater of Bacchus, what do you do? Do you endanger your business relationship by saying, no, I don't participate in that?
All this stuff is the same as today.
Yep. Yep. Or do you say, I'm a Christian, I don't do that? What do you do? So now we've talked to the folks at Thyatira, and they have bid us on our way. Probably Lydia's family. We've probably seen Lydia's family, right? Maybe her great nephews and great nieces. And we go to Philadelphia. Oops. No, I'm sorry. We go to Sardis first. Sorry. We go to Sardis. Sardis was already an ancient city by the time that we are interacting with them. And they are part of, and all of these churches are part of, an ancient region that was called Lydia. This is where Lydia gets her name, or Ludia. Long before long before Alexander the Great and Romans and all. And in fact, the king of Sardis, the last king there in Lydia, was named Croesus. And the old folks in the room, we remember an expression, rich as Croesus. Rich as Croesus. Now we'd say, what are you, Bill Gates? Right? Right? It was an incredibly wealthy city. He was the last king of Lydia. He was defeated by Cyrus the Great in in 546. Cyrus the Great, the Persian, where have you heard about him before? Yeah. And Isaiah, right? He is the Persian ruler who lets the children of Israel go after their Babylonian exile. He is the one that Isaiah says the Lord calls my Messiah, my chosen one, Cyrus, to send the people home. So you get appreciation. His kingdom was spreading in all directions. So he conquered Croesus, this last king of Lydia, and his capital was in Sardis. And we're looking here, we are standing in the Greco-Roman city in the valley, and we're looking up at the ancient Acropolis. There's really not much up there anymore. And you can see that's a pretty sharp climb there. And Croesus had his palace up there. He had his treasury up there, and it was considered pretty much so inviolable because it's so hard to get up there. In fact, tourists don't go up there today because there's only one pathway up to the top. It's extremely narrow. It's pretty treacherous. And in Croesus' lifetime and kings before, it was very easily defended against people trying to assault you there, except that this is a geologically unstable area. And sometimes there would be an earthquake that would open up a crack in that mountain that would create what rock climbers call a chimney, where you can crawl up, put your feet and your hands on either side and kind of shimmy up. And it was discovered, one of the battles against that Acropolis, that one of those chimneys had opened up. And the opposing army sent troops up by night through one of those chimneys and attacked the city. So the king literally went to bed at night thinking everything was fine, to be awakened by thieves in the night. And you remember what Jesus says. What does Jesus say to Sardis, to the church at Sardis? Chapter 3, I know your works. You have the name of being alive, but you are dead. Awake and strengthen what remains and is on the point of death. I've found your works, I've not found your works perfect. And what does he say? If you will not awake, I will come like a thief. Yeah, like a thief. He's very familiar here. Jesus knows the lore of the city, the identity of the city, and is playing off of that in his warnings to that city. Now we're going to go to Philadelphia. No, not that Philadelphia. And we don't have good ruins from Philadelphia. So I'm resorting to, this is a picture of the, don't make me say this twice, the Caryatides, that's part of ruins on the Acropolis in Athens to illustrate this technique. Notice what Jesus says to the church at Philadelphia. He says that in verse 12, he who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, right? Notice that these female figures are pillars in the temple. So probably there was an example of this in the city of Philadelphia as well. We just don't have anything extant to show us that.
What do you think about like the very succinctness of these letters? Like, is it like,
Well, it caught your attention, straightforward and to the point, right? And of course, there's going to be this extended vision that he's got to get to. Yeah.
right now you gotta say, these are good things, but you're messing up.
Yeah. Or you're doing right. Remember, some of these churches, he says you're doing right. That's part of the amazing thing about this letter is it speaks to people who are under persecution, people who have become apathetic, and people who are letting themselves be assimilated. It's able to speak to people in very different circumstances. Now we're headed to Laodicea. And you can see Laodicea sits there. It's really part of a tri-city area with Colossae and Hierapolis. Remember that in Paul's letter to the Colossians, he says, be sure to read the letter I sent to the Laodicean church and make sure they read your letter. I think we'll see why it's not surprising that the Laodiceans evidently didn't save that letter. That is a lost work from Paul. There's a prominent city here. This is the main drag, a colonnaded sidewalk on either side. It had an incredibly sophisticated water system. This is part of an inverted siphon system that would bring cold running water into the city. And they're very proud of this system. In 2015, I've done a little kind of photoshopping here. This large block was discovered at, it's a visible block in the water system that had on it what is called now the water law. And it's a portion of a larger law of which we know. And I will read it to you. This really tells you how important this water system is to them. Those who divide the water for his personal use should pay 5,000 denarius to the empire treasury. In other words, this is public water. You do not get to use this yourself. It is forbidden to use the city water for free or grant it to private individuals. In other words, you can't take a bribe and let people siphon. Those who buy the water cannot violate the Vespasian edict. We don't know. Those who damage water pipes should pay 5,000 denarius. Remember that a denarius is the average day wage. Protective roofs should be established for the water depots and water pipes in the city. The governor's office will appoint 2 citizens as curator every year to ensure the safety of the water resource. Nobody who has farms close to the water channels can use the water for agriculture. In other words, you can't block off the dam like the evil cattle barons did in all those cowboy movies, right? This is public water, and it's a big, fat, hairy deal because it was really good, cold running water into the city. They also had an excellent source of heated water. Right nearby are hot springs, and you can go there to this day. It's a big tourist location. This is actually called Cleopatra's Pool because in her journey from Egypt to Rome, she stopped in Laodicea to go to the spa there and take a dip. It's only about waist deep. You can't swim in it. But it's natural hot springs.
Those are like geothermal.
Yeah. And again, this is a geologically active area, right? Nearby, that's hot springs. So that's mineral water. And as the minerals pour over the side, they accumulate. So those are like stalactites, only outside. And you can see at the top of each of those are hot springs that are only about ankle deep. I should have I'll send this to you. A friend of mine is traveling out west, and they're in an area where there are hot springs, and they got pictures of elk taking their spa day in the hot springs. But so Laodicea to this day, right, it's got hot springs, very attractive to the tourists. And what does Jesus say about Laodicea? It's the one church about whom he has nothing good to say. Chapter 3, verse 15, I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were cold or hot, something. So because you are lukewarm, some some translations say tepid. Ugh. I will spew you out of my mouth. Right? He's very much so speaking to their civic pride, who they think they are, but they're not really. To this day, again, because of the waters there, the textile industry is a major industry there. They don't have access to the madder root the way the folks at Thyatira do. So a lot of white, only we wouldn't say white, it's almost white linens there, right? And Turkish towels, when you hear about Turkish cotton and Turkish towels, they're coming out of here. And there's that huge theater there. Again, you can see there on the stage is statuary dedicated to the gods. So the whole time you're there watching Hamilton, you're actually seeing the gods depicted in the background. So I hope from this, you've gotten a sense that the imagery that Jesus and John the Seer use in these letters acknowledges the imperial propaganda that is just all over the place, literally in the architecture, all over the place for these cities. The mythic iconography that is in the architecture around them, this just bombardment with pagan propaganda, and also playing to the individual character and identity of each of these 7 churches. And I want us to look real quickly at how this last letter to Laodicea closes. In chapter 3, verse 19 through 21. Somebody read that for us.
But those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline. So be earnest and repent. Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him, and he with me. To him who overcomes, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne.
Thank you. Okay. We've seen a lot of enthronement language and conquering and vanquishing, right? By gods, by Romans. But John is reminding us, he is bringing us back to what image that he saw at the beginning. The open door. And in verse 21, where is Christ? And is he seated on a throne? Who's really enthroned? Is it Zeus? Is it the emperor? Who's really enthroned?
Jesus.
Right? And the Father. God is enthroned and Jesus with him, right? And so there's this counter image. We're being brought back to that image back in chapter 1. The one who is seated amongst the lampstands, right? The one who is sovereign. Also look, John, you rightly said, we're brought to this image of a door. And Jesus is saying he's standing at the door and knocking. And if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him. Is that burgers and fries? What is that? Communion. Absolutely. Remember that the ancient church, just like disciples of Christ, the ancient church had communion every time it met. So Jesus is talking about being with them, right, in communion. And he talks about that we need to open the door. I want you to look at chapter 4, verse 1, and somebody read the first sentence.
After this I looked, and lo, in heaven an open door. And the first voice, which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, "Come up hither, and I will show you what must take place after this."
Thank you. So Jesus says in verse 20, you need to open the door. And then in chapter 4, verse 1, where's the door? It's already open. You're going to see this repeatedly in Revelation, where we build up to this kind of, you need to, and things are looking critical. And then there's this moment of mercy. Jesus has already opened the door. Those who are in our Get Acquainted with the Bible class, you remember in primeval history, in the very first few chapters of Genesis, we see that again and again. If you eat from the tree, you'll die. Did they die? No, God
No.
made clothes for them. Right? We're gonna, Cain, you're gonna, I'm banishing you, you're gonna wander the earth. I can't take it. Okay, I'll put a mark on your head to protect you so nobody kills you. I'm gonna wipe the world out. Okay, Noah, build an ark. Tower of Babel, I'm gonna confound their languages. I'm done with them, just scatter them across the face of the earth. Okay, Abraham, I want you to be a blessing to the nations. We're gonna see that same pattern in Revelation again and again. You're gonna see everything look really bad. And then there's mercy. And this certainly would have spoken to these churches that are experiencing persecution. It would have spoken to the churches that start to realize, wow, we really are dead spiritually. Wow. And to those that feel like, I have to go along. If I don't go along, I'm going to lose all my business partners. I'm going to be socially ostracized. It looks really bad. Christ is enthroned and the door is open. And we're going to see that again and again in the book of Revelation. Questions before we adjourn?
Mary Elizabeth, it's more of a comment than a question.
Certainly.
We have an awful lot of old churches in the Cincinnati area. And because of this class, I can tell you almost all of them have one of those round stained glass.
Absolutely.
And totally enjoying seeing them.
Good.
And it has given whole new purpose to me to see them.
Good. 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 And I bet a lot of those churches are Catholic.
When I was way back after Noah docked the ark, when I was in college and had a sociology class, sociology, they were talking about how Cincinnati and Price Hill in particular was 95% Catholic. That is true.
Yeah. The Roman Catholics have a great tradition of stained glass and of taking good care of it. And really, really great stained glass artistry. So I'm glad you're enjoying that.
I've always loved stained glass, but when I see the round ones, it's like, I know what that means now.
That's great. I'm glad.
Yeah.
All righty. Time to go to church. Go in peace to serve the Lord, who is enthroned and has opened the door.
Thank you. Great lesson.
Thank you. Wonderful lesson.
So glad. Hey, Debbie. It's good to see you. Kathy, how are you doing? Oh, she's already signed off. Oh, well.